You know, for over 70 years, it's been called one of Australia's most profound and enduring mysteries. We're talking about a man found dead on a beach, a secret code, and a trail of clues that just went completely cold for decades. Today, we're going to dive into the incredibly strange case of the Somerton man and the modern science that finally gave him his name back.
All right, so picture this. It's a summer morning in 1948 on Somerton Beach, just south of Adelaide. A man is discovered, kind of slumped against the seawall. Now, he's well-dressed in a suit and tie. His shoes are perfectly clean. But he has no wallet, no identification, and there are zero signs of a struggle. It honestly looks like he just fell asleep and never woke up.
And you know what? The initial investigation just made things even weirder. The man was in peak physical condition. The autopsy showed his organs were heavily congested, which led the pathologist to believe his death was unnatural. He thought maybe it was a fast-acting poison, something that was impossible to detect back then. But a search for any kind of poison came up completely empty. The only other clue? His last meal was a pasty. It was a perfect puzzle with no obvious solution.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. While there was no ID, the man's pockets held this collection of items that would launch one of the absolute strangest investigations in Australian history. Months go by, and an investigator decides to search the man's clothing one more time. And that's when he finds it. Tucked away in this tiny hidden fob pocket, one that everybody had missed before, was a small, rolled-up piece of paper. Just 2 words were printed on it, and this tiny scrap of paper, it would become the most famous clue of the entire case.
The phrase was Tamam, Shud. Experts quickly identified it as Persian, meaning it is ended or it is finished, and they traced it back to the very last page of the Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam, a well-known book of poems. So this was huge. The police now knew they weren't just looking for a man, they were looking for a very specific book.
And here's where the case takes another completely bizarre turn. After police put out a public appeal, a local man comes forward. He says he found a copy of that exact book, just tossed into the back of his unlocked car, right around the time the body was found. He didn't think much of it until he saw the news. When police looked at it, sure enough, the very last page, the one with the words Tamam Shud, had been torn right out.
But hold on, because the book held one more secret. On the inside back cover, written faintly in pencil, were 5 lines of capital letters. The second line was crossed out. It looked like a code. Naval intelligence, professional cryptographers, amateur sleuths, everyone took a crack at it, but the letters just wouldn't give up their meaning. This uncrackable code would become the brick wall the investigation ran into for more than half a century.
So with the code being a total mystery and still no leads on the man's identity, the trail just went cold. But the public's fascination with the case? Oh, that didn't go anywhere. The mystery fueled decades of wild speculation, everything from jilted lovers to Cold War spies. It really captured the imagination in a way few other cases ever have.
For years, the case was just defined by these strange early clues. I mean, look at this timeline. After the man was buried nameless in 49, the mystery just festered. Then you get to the 1970s, and Cold War paranoia is everywhere, so these elaborate spy theories start popping up. Decades passed with basically no progress until 2010, when researchers proposed a much simpler explanation for the code. But the real game changer didn't come until 2021, when investigators turned to the man himself, exhuming his body and setting the stage for the final breakthrough.
Let's be honest, the spy theory was compelling. I mean, an undetectable poison, clothing tags ripped out to hide his identity, a secret code. It sounds like something straight out of a movie. But modern analysis gives us much more grounded explanations. Pathologists back then often suggested poison when they couldn't find another cause. And removing annoying clothing tags? That wasn't that unusual. In fact, some clothes in a suitcase that was linked to the man did have Australian-made labels still attached.
And what about that infamous code? Well, after years of intense analysis, even researchers at the University of Adelaide could only conclude it was probably an initialism, which basically is a simple shorthand, using the first letter of each word in a sentence. Despite running all these complex computer analyses, they couldn't find a definitive match. The conclusion? It was probably just a personal note, not some sophisticated spy cipher.
You see, for decades, everyone was focused on the external stuff, the book, the code, the suitcase. But the real key to finally unlocking this whole thing wasn't in any of those clues. It was a perfect example of how much forensics has evolved. The answer was hidden in the man himself, just waiting for technology to catch up. Okay, so here's this incredible bit of, I don't know if it's foresight or just dumb luck. Before the man was buried in 1949, police made a plaster cast of his head and shoulders. Pretty standard procedure back then. What no one could have possibly known was that this one act would preserve the single most important clue of all. Embedded in that plaster for over 70 years were several strands of his hair, and in 2017, researchers realized that this hair held the key, a viable DNA sample.
This led them to a technique called genetic genealogy, which is this revolutionary tool for solving cold cases. So here's how it works. Investigators take the unknown DNA and they upload it to public genealogy databases. The system then looks for matches, people who share DNA, like third or fourth cousins who've also uploaded their DNA kits. Once they find these distant relatives, the real work begins, building this enormous family tree, tracing it back generations and then forward again until they can finally pinpoint the one missing person who connects all those dots.
And when I say enormous, I mean it. To find the Somerton man, Professor Derek Abbott and his colleague Colleen Fitzpatrick had to build out a family tree that eventually included about 4,000 people. I mean, can you even imagine the amount of painstaking work that took? It's just monumental. So, after all that work, after thousands of names and family connections, they finally zeroed in on one man. One man who fit the timeline, who had no death certificate, and whose DNA was a perfect match to the family tree they'd built. So the big question, after 73 years of being just the unknown man, who was he? His name was Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker, born in 1905 in a suburb of Melbourne. Not a spy, not a foreigner. He was an Australian. And what's amazing is that as soon as they had this name, so many of the other puzzles just started to click into place. That name, T. Keane, found on some clothing in his suitcase, yep, that was his brother-in-law, Thomas Keane. Why was a guy from Melbourne in Adelaide? Well, it turns out he had separated from his wife, and she had moved to South Australia. He might have just been trying to find her. And that unsolvable code? Webb wrote poetry, but he also loved betting on horses, which makes the most likely explanation that the letters were just the initials of horses in a race. Now, it is important to point out that this identification came from the incredible work of independent researchers. The South Australian police, who are working with the DNA from the exhumation, they haven't officially confirmed these findings just yet, but the genealogical evidence is incredibly strong. So we have a name, we have a story. This case shows us just how far science has come, you know? It's letting us solve a mystery our grandparents read about in the newspaper. And yet, some pieces of the puzzle are still missing. The precise cause of his death, still unknown. And while the horse racing theory makes a lot of sense, that code has never been definitively broken. So the biggest mystery might be solved, but Carl Webb still took some secrets with him to Somerton Beach.